Hey there, welcome to the TBH podcast with me, Toby B. Hemingway. This is the monthly digest where I recap the month's stories from the TBH with Toby B. Hemingway Substack newsletter. This is the month of August. I only managed to get 3 pieces out this month. It was a busy month, the final month of school break for summer, traveling, chasing the kids. But one of the pieces is a longer one, so plenty to listen to here today. Thanks for listening. The first piece, Wanker Cars. Well, the title says it all, really. But I do take particular umbrage to what I consider the king of wanker cars at this point, which is the Tesla. It's hard writing things like this because, you know, the people I like drive that car. And I don't think they're wankers, but the car is, if you know what I mean. I guess that's what I was trying to get at. Maybe I'm overly sensitive to the way cars sort of appear or feel on the road, but you know, it doesn't help when the owner of the car company buys the world's largest digital information service to prove to even more people what a complete wanker he is. Like, we all know wankers own businesses that we engage with. I've always heard about what a bad bloke the Home Depot owner is and things like that, but gee man, it's hard when they're rubbing it in your face all the time. I've never seen or heard from the owner of Home Depot. When I was traveling recently, I borrowed a car and it had a sticker on it. And I kind of felt like the sticker made the car a bit of a wanker car. So I went so far as to cover it up with another sticker, so that the person could easily remove it and not damage their sticker. But yeah, that's how paranoid I get about these things, I guess. But that was that story. Then the next one was about the TV show Northern Exposure, which I've always been a big fan of, which just came back to screens via Amazon Prime, which is great. I'm watching them all again, and I had a lot to say about it. Brought up a lot of feelings, mostly about loneliness, but not necessarily in a bad way. So, yeah, I worked on that one for a while. That was a much longer piece than I normally would publish, and in that regard, maybe it's easier to listen to. So I hope you have a listen and enjoy it. The show is set in the fictional town of Sicily, Alaska, but they shot it in a town called Roslyn in Washington, which is why the cafe that you always see with the moose in front of it says Rosalind's Cafe. They put the apostrophe S in for the show. Fun fact, it's actually Roslyn Cafe. Anyway, I think the town still looks exactly the same. They don't make shows like that anymore. That show just went forever, and the episodes are long, and the cast must have just been camped out there. Anyway, I'm kind of curious. Might go there one of these days. If I do, maybe I'll write about it. And then the last piece, the third piece, is about, well, I was at the diner that I like, and they do one of those automatic, digital radio player things, and you never know what song's going to come on, and it's not a human choosing, it's AI choosing what song. And I guess they have it tuned to classic rock, which is fine most of the time. And then I was about to get my breakfast the other day and Feel Like Making Love came on, and geez, what a terrible song to eat breakfast to. I also took the opportunity to poke fun at John Mayer, which I love to do. One of my old friends loves John Mayer, and I can't stand him. So, you know, that's a pretty good guy to poke fun at, I think, John Mayer. I think that's safe. But let's get back to hand-picked playlists, please. People, it's not that hard. Just throw 30 songs you like together, and at least it'll feel like, yeah, a human chose this. This makes sense. That's enough. Let's get to the stories. Thanks again for listening and or reading. Please subscribe to this podcast, rate it, review it if you could. It all helps get these stories out. And if you're listening to this and not subscribed to the TBH Substack, please do that too. tbhemingway.substack.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next month. Wanker Cars from August 1st, 2024. An editorial note: my voice was pretty shot when I recorded this one, so apologies in advance. Some Australian and British English words are hard to translate into American. Wanker might be at the top of the list. Merriam-Webster defines it simply as someone who masturbates. Their secondary definition is jerk, dolt. I think the true meaning lies somewhere in between. A jerk who is also fooling themselves, perhaps. My kids hear me complain about Tesla drivers a lot on the road, way too much. Most Tesla folk never use their turn signals and seem to think the road is owed to them, but I won't get into all that. The crux of it is, I think the Tesla is the current champion of wanker cars. You know wanker cars. A friend once perfectly described Land Rovers to me as the designer purse of cars. That's a wanker car. When I was a kid, my dad was in love with Porsches, but eventually I could see him spurn his beloved auto. In Australia in the 80s, it was most definitely a wanker car. He knew it and couldn't overcome the stigma, eventually opting for my uncle's used BMW sedan until the heat died down. Prius had a rough run for a moment there. They were so popular in Los Angeles upon release, with people of almost all driving budgets, that they suffered from their own success. Too much of anything gets on the nose eventually. Another mark against Teslas. My wife had a Prius. I loved it. More than one parked in a row in our old neighbourhood became colloquially known as a Silver Lake sandwich. Now they're old hat. The earlier ones are even a bit sad looking. High on my list of what defines a wanker car is obviously the vehicle itself. Is it trying too hard? And then the stereotypical conduct of its driver. But there's one other category that irks me, and that Tesla, in particular, have drawn my attention to. Bumper stickers. By which I mean a lack of them. Tesla drivers seem allergic to bumper stickers. Have you ever seen one on a Tesla? You'd be more likely to see a turn signal. There I go again. Sorry, kids. I once saw a Tesla with its carpool lane stickers taped inside the windows, rendering them both useless and illegally placed, just to avoid sorrying those glorious curves. There's any number of other easily identifiable wanker cars in LA. You don't have to look far. But with the recent release of the much-anticipated Cybertruck, I think Tesla is now in its own league. Has there ever been a car that more violently screams, "Get fucked," to everyone else on the road? It's certainly not helped by the very public conduct of the company's founder himself. Jerk. Dolt. What's the word? That last factor may finally be turning the tide. The cars might as well be called Musks, and now the company is in its second straight quarter of sales declines. I've also seen 2 different Cybertrucks on tow trucks in the past week, and I'm not too proud to admit a thrilling rush of schadenfreude each time. Earlier this week, I had lunch with a friend of mine who loves gadgets. He even has one of those nifty electric motorbikes, which got me thinking about electric cars. You wouldn't get a Tesla, would you? I asked worriedly on the way to our vehicles. His a stylish German sports car, mine the beaten-up Toyota Tacoma. No way, he replied, scoffing. I hate Elon Musk. Wanker, I said. The Exquisite Loneliness of Northern Exposure from August 22nd, 2024. Have you ever moved to a place where you didn't know anybody? The closest I've come was when I moved to Los Angeles 2.5 decades ago and joined my brother here. He was the one person I knew. I would say I immigrated, but at the time I didn't realize that that was what I was doing. It felt more like some time off, a break from my life as I knew it in my Australian homeland. I needed space. It wasn't a new feeling. I had moved away from my first year of university at age 17 to a campus just an hour's drive from my childhood home, Melbourne. Then to Sydney for a semester. The US too never felt very far away. All you had to do was turn on the TV. In early adulthood, bouncing between those Australian towns, I developed a strong affection for a handful of American TV shows, which I still feel. Most of my close friends loved The Simpsons, and we still quote it to this day. The other popular show I fell for was Seinfeld. During high school, a stoner friend and I bonded over it immediately. when its first season ran late at night on Australian TV. Recently, I indulged the wonder of modern streaming by rewatching the entire run over some months. One other show that hooked me in those years was Northern Exposure, a little more obscure, and after its first few airings it disappeared off of TV schedules completely. Northern Exposure first aired between 1990 and 1995. As our rapidly technifying world jolted into the 2000s, I would look for ways to rewatch the show on occasion. Video cassette copies were staggeringly rare, reruns unheard of, and online rumours abound regarding song licensing complications. Though I did eventually discover some episodes on YouTube, the audio had been slowed down to a near slur and the picture often obscured to evade autonomous copyright searches. It was no fun to watch. Like the fictional town of Sicily, Alaska, within which it is set, Northern Exposure unwittingly remained at arm's length from a rapidly modernising outside world. Now, a decade after streaming services became the norm, Northern Exposure has finally taken its place in TV's bulging digital cabinet, available to US subscribers of Amazon Prime Video in all its fuzzy filmic glory. I was so excited by the discovery that I tried to convince my wife, who works for the streamer, they should be marketing this faded but blessed rebirth aggressively. I dove right back in from episode 1 and have been making my way through the seasons ever since. I was excited to begin, but wary too, unsure of how I would feel if my fond memories were shown to be unwarranted and the show wasn't so good after all. How well you can trust the taste of your younger self feels undetachable from the many other, more plain and humbling realities of middle age. There's something otherworldly about revisiting a TV show after all this time. I vaguely remembered storylines and characters, and had inflated some narratives in my mind while minimising others. Some of the themes, most noticeably regarding sex and sexuality, are predictably out of date, while others, particularly around Indigenous representation, if not note perfect, feel comfortingly prescient. All in all, I still enjoy the show very much and continue to devour its many episodes. But what has struck me most about Northern Exposure during this revisit is the elemental loneliness of the show and its protagonists. This may not be helped by the fact that I myself often watch episodes, or parts of them, alone, after the people in my house who quite reasonably couldn't care less about this 90s relic have gone to bed. Out of the show's 9 main characters, in case you watch, I'd classify them as Joel, Maggie, Chris, Holling, Shelley, Maurice, Ruth Ann, Ed, and Marilyn. Only 2 are in an ongoing relationship with each other, and none have children in town. Joel's early engagement to a New Yorker ends quickly under the strain of becoming long distance, a strain felt by the character as much as the show's writers, I assume. Partners come and go sometimes. Joel and Maggie play TV's old will they won't they game to middling effect, but only Holling and Shelley would identify as anything other than single. It's occurred to me that this device serves to further emphasise the community's need for each other in such a remote place, and forces the characters into contact and conflict. They can't simply pair off into self-sustainable family pods. But as the hours of watching have ticked by, that feels too convenient an explanation. Something one might hear in a freshman scriptwriting class. There's more to it, I feel, about what the show, or its creators at least, may have to say about life. My other favourite shows from the era, Seinfeld and The Simpsons, portray common types of families, both the kind you make with your friends and the classic TV nuclear family. The 1990s was the last full decade before the social media era began, a time when being together truly meant being together. The COVID pandemic changed a lot of things in society, but it also simply accelerated existing trends, one of which was the diminishing priority we put on seeing each other in real life, or IRL as the experience is reduced to online. The wholesale devaluation of anything resembling a physical community. Dividing people is how politicians and corporations most often thrive. We have never been more separate. In its own dreamlike analogue way, Northern Exposure somehow presaged this shift. What the show foretells, I feel, is that eventually we could all be marooned by modern life, stuck in our own digital Sicily, without the vistas or warmth of its humanity. Joel, a freshly minted doctor, is forced to work in this place, far from his beloved New York City. He agreed to the arrangement with the state of Alaska in order to subsidise his medical degree, but he was promised work in a city hospital, not the dilapidated storefront of a one-horse town. He is set adrift, isolated from his people, and, more obviously, feels cheated. We see that from the very first episode, ranting to anyone who'll listen, and he reminds us of it constantly throughout the show. He won't accept the change or integrate into a community he sees as beneath him. Instead, complaining incessantly and wearing his marooning as a hair shirt. Much like The Simpsons or other cartoons, the main characters of Northern Exposure exist in an almost static state, trapped in an aging-free, under-the-microscope world. Bills aren't much spoken of, appetites are easily met at Hollings Bar, The Brick, and friendships and rivalries fluidly switch between people who are somehow wed to this seemingly industry-adjacent location. Is it a logging town, a farming hub, a tourist attraction? Rare is the solid clue. Sicily just is. Life moves fast, we're always told, but not to these characters. Living so much online can feel that way too, as if everything is happening all at once, only it's happening to other people, not you. You're just glued to the eyeglass, going nowhere. As a younger man, I didn't look unlike Joel Fleischman. I'm not Jewish or from New York, but I have the nose for the job, somewhat of the fro too, and my big city upbringing and outsider status in Los Angeles has definitely resulted in a noticeable dose of his cynicism. Was his exile what first appealed to me about the show? His loneliness too? The character himself isn't particularly likeable, which may explain why in an era before difficult central characters, the actor Rob Morrow found scant work. Yet the show still manages to loosely revolve around him, at least in the first few seasons. We get to know Cicely through his lonely, bewildered wanderings. Loneliness is one of those topics that therapists can have a field day with, most commonly because we tend to associate it with being alone rather than merely feeling alone. A person can easily feel lonely in a crowd, and I have on numerous occasions, particularly when I was younger. Northern Exposure marinates its characters in loneliness, even when they're elbow to elbow, sharing a beer at the Brick. Yet we watch them carry on, quite happily most of the time, perfectly pleased to see one another when they must. People there are often shoehorned into social situations despite their loner tendencies, typically with joyful results. Joel waxes lyrical about the lack of progress in Sicily, whilst being drawn further and further into what he often derides as the town's backwards culture. In one episode, Joel is literally kidnapped by a couple deep in the woods, but eventually gives up trying to break his shackles, instead sharing their surprisingly good food and offering blunt marital advice before leaving without ever alerting the authorities. In another, he is told, point blank, that he has no friends in town, and then throws a party at his house in an attempt to improve his social connections. A recurring theme for Maurice is his rage over Hollings stealing his young beauty queen girlfriend, Shelley, a romantic and domestic hole in his ego he struggles unsuccessfully to fill, season to season, in his uniquely American capitalist god of unlikability kind of way, buying too much, giving up so little, infuriated all the while by the minions who never seem to appreciate all he has done for them. Childless, but for a rarely sighted accidental adult offspring, he embodies the bitter loneliness of an estranged parent and addicted capitalist fully, resenting the townsfolk for not recognising all that his alleged suffering and intellect has brought to their lesser selves, wrestling with his loneliness while still choosing it over any other of his many options. Maggie, despite her moonlighting-esque flirtations with Joel, is renowned for the men she dates dying on her. It bothers her, of course, but ultimately, resourceful and handier with a tool than 90% of the show's men, she seems okay alone, like it's meant to be. In fact, everyone on Northern Exposure is, in their own way, happy alone. In another episode, Ruth Ann's son comes for a rare visit. He is her opposite. She a small-town shopkeep who paints on the side, he a big-city stockbroker with no time for hobbies. Now he's feigning a renewed interest in humble pursuits like fly fishing, only to fall in with Maurice and a mountain of fresh bookkeeping on a stowed-away laptop. She sees their distance as healthy and can't wait for him to leave, which he eventually does. At night, when not at the Brick, characters host intimate dinners or simply read a book, or in the case of budding filmmaker Ed, watch a VHS. Other than that, anything as modern as a TV is almost invisible. In a sense, their loneliness is their companion, and not even the still smitten after all these months Holling and Shelley see eye to eye most of the time. They need their space from each other too. She repeatedly sends him on camping trips with glee. Still, unlike many of us in the digital era, the characters always find a way to come together. The goofy neighbour might not burst through your apartment door at any given second, or spout Bible verses from over a well-manicured hedge, but they're out there, just a chilly walk or a truck ride away. Ordering dinner to be delivered to your door on a whim, or catching the latest movie right on your couch aren't options, let alone cutting someone out of your life because things got rough or awkward at some point. You'll run into them again soon enough, or need their particular and unique personal resource just when you least expect it. The community of Sicily is interdependent, unpredictable, and alive in a way we've come to fear. These loners still need each other, so they find a way to get along. Loneliness is a personal condition, after all. It doesn't mean you don't like people. Sometimes it's the opposite. But people are like alcohol that way. Our love for it might be the same, but our tolerances will differ. Everyone has to find their very own balance. Still, going cold turkey on people just isn't a realistic option. Between its release in 1990 and re-airing 34 years later, Northern Exposure suffered a cultural death in a way my other favourite shows didn't. The flame wasn't kept alive by the series remaining in production, like The Simpsons incredibly, or transferring to rounds of never-ending syndication and streaming, like Seinfeld and many more. Everyone at my wife's work simply describes Northern Exposure as a show their parents were probably into, thrown into the streaming library for old-timers like me to enjoy. In that way, it speaks to its handful of viewers from beyond the grave, from a time before smartphones and time-sucking apps and a global pandemic and a further digital pandemic of aloneness, a knowing and seemingly ancient voice. Don't give up on your friends and neighbours, it whispers, via the old 4:3 screen ratio, over helicopter shots of figures wandering a boundless wilderness. Small towns in remote places like Alaska are, after all, synonymous with solitude, as are the spaces we so often virtually inhabit now. These places might attract the lonely, but it doesn't mean we have to be alone. Feel like throwing up. From August 29th, 2024. At the diner I like this week, with the usual old guys scattered around the counter and rock radio playing in the background, the 70s Bad Company song Feel Like Makin' Love unexpectedly caught my attention. I resent my years being left in the hands of internet radio services, those nascent AI-powered random playlist generators of mediocre crap, and this is exactly why. No one has ever wanted to hear that song, and no self-respecting human DJ would subject a listener to it. The music played in stores or restaurants mostly washes over me, but some songs hit like falling anvils. Walking on the Sun by Smash Mouth must be played in just about every supermarket on the English-speaking earth. I'll happily be collecting the groceries some days, then suddenly realise they're playing it again. Before even registering that clown horn keyboard intro, a strange urge overcomes me, the unmistakable desire to smash a pickle jar loudly and walk out. I just received my breakfast when Feel Like Makin' Love came on, thus being forced to eat the day's first meal while suffering under the realisation that what the lead singer is really howling repeatedly in each chorus is, "I'm horny." By my count, the song has 52 lines of lyrics, over 25 of which are the title being sung again and again and again. Scream "I'm horny" into a microphone that many times instead of "I feel like making love," and prepare to be carted away. Put that way, it's not nearly so cute a song, is it? More coffee? Bad songs may have been on the mind. The musician Annie Clark, also known as St. Vincent, was recently interviewed by Kerrang! Magazine, and in it she was asked her opinion on the worst song ever written. This was brought to my attention by a favourite rock critic of mine, Stephen Hayden, on his great podcast IndieCast. Hayden suggests that all music interviews would be bettered by including this question, and I couldn't agree more. Clark's answer was Daughters by John Mayer, a skin-crawlingly bad song covering John's humble opinion on why fathers and mothers, should be good to their daughters. Spoiler, it's basically so that they grow up to be better dates for John. I quietly filed that in my voluminous mental folder of reasons why I can't stand John Mayer, headlined by This YouTube Old Gem. And let me just state for the record, this song does not make me feel like making love. On the way home from watching the Dodgers at a bar with my brother the other night, a woman who looked in pretty rough shape staggered out into the intersection where I was waiting to turn left at the light. She found herself stranded between lanes and stood with her back just a couple of feet from my cracked open window, swaying, vaping, and watching the cars turn through the dark in front of her. We were both simply waiting for a break in the traffic. Eventually she turned to me, and shortly before running away between beams of headlights toward the safety of the sidewalk, uttered words I felt compelled to scribble down. Lines that, upon reflection, were better than anything the above songwriters, minus Clark perhaps, could ever have hoped to pen. Hi, I'm Alicia. It's nice to meet you. LA ruined my fucking life. If you see my mama, tell her I'm alive. All right, there you go. Quite a haunting note to end on, I'll admit. But I was quite captivated by that young lady in the traffic. And her last line there really had me thinking about her last call with Mum. Anyway, thanks very much for listening all the way through. I hope she's doing well. I hope you're doing well. And please subscribe on your favourite podcast service to this podcast. I'd appreciate it. And also to the Substack, of course, tbhemingway.substack.com. It's easy. The stories come into your email. You can listen to them. You can read them. You can share them. It's fun. You can comment. Please do. All the music on here is either by my old band Horse Stories or me playing around. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves. See you in September.